May 31st, 2006. Stockholm, Sweden. At 5:47 a.m., 53 armed police officers stormed 10 locations and unplugged the servers powering one of the most hated websites on Earth. Within hours, the Pirate Bay, used by 25 million people a day, is declared dead. Hollywood celebrates. Prosecutors hold victory press conferences. An operation blamed for tens of billions of dollars in losses has finally been erased. But 3 days later, something impossible happens. The site comes back online. Not partially. Not weakened. Fully operational, mocking its attackers, larger than before. Every server had been seized. The founders were in custody. Yet the system survived. If taking the machines didn't kill it, what exactly were they fighting, and why couldn't they shut it down? To the millions who used it, the Pirate Bay didn't feel like a criminal operation. It felt practical. Most users believed they were visiting a simple index, nothing more than a search engine for files that already existed elsewhere on the Internet. No downloads were stored there. No movies were hosted on its servers. You typed a name, clicked a link, and your computer did the rest. That distinction mattered. Because under Swedish law at the time, linking wasn't the same as hosting. Behind the scenes, the site's core architecture reflected that belief. At the center was a young Swedish programmer named Gottfrid Svartholm, known online as Anakata. In 2001, at just 19, he was running a small server from his bedroom floor in Stockholm, focused less on content and more on systems. To Gottfrid, the goal wasn't theft. It was efficiency. He believed information moved best when no single machine mattered, when no central authority could decide who had access and who didn't. The tracker under his bed wasn't designed to store culture, it was designed to get out of the way. And that's why, to its users, trusting the Pirate Bay didn't feel reckless. It felt like using the Internet the way it was supposed to work. What they didn't see was how that philosophy, spread across millions of machines, was quietly turning a bedroom experiment into something far harder to control than anyone realized. The first warning didn't come from police or politicians. It came from success. By 2003, what started as a side project for an anti-copyright collective had outgrown its original purpose. The BitTorrent tracker Gottfrid Svartholm built, meant to quietly help people find files, was suddenly pulling in traffic none of them had planned for. Thousands became tens of thousands. Every download passed through a single machine. That growth created a choice. They could slow it down, narrow the scope, or put limits in place. Or they could build around the pressure and see how far it would go. They chose the second option. As bandwidth bills climbed and attention followed, Gottfrid and his collaborators, Fredrik Nage and Peter Sunde, made a structural decision that changed everything. They launched PRQ, a hosting company with one defining rule: no questions asked, no logs kept. Anything legal pressure tried to touch would simply have nowhere to land. It was a defensive move, but it carried a signal. By designing a system that refused to remember, they weren't just protecting users, they were daring critics to try harder. At that moment, the Pirate Bay could still have remained a small, contained tool. Nothing forced it to scale into a public symbol. But instead of treating the surge as a warning, they treated it as validation. And from that point forward, every attempt to slow them down would require something far stronger than a polite request to stop. What most users never realized was that the Pirate Bay wasn't just avoiding control. It was provoking it. On the surface, the site presented itself as neutral infrastructure, an index, a directory, a technical middleman with no opinion about what passed through it. That framing made users feel safe. It suggested distance. Plausible deniability. But internally, that neutrality was never the full truth. When Hollywood lawyers sent takedown requests, like the 2004 demand from DreamWorks over Shrek, the response wasn't quiet compliance or legal clarification. It was public humiliation. The message Gottfrid sent back wasn't just defiant, it was performative. And when the entire exchange was posted on the homepage, it revealed something important. The Pirate Bay wasn't simply resisting enforcement. It was feeding on confrontation. Every legal threat was treated as marketing. Every warning letter became proof of relevance. Traffic spiked. Donations followed. The brand grew stronger with each attack. Users thought they were visiting a passive tool. In reality, they were participating in a system that required enemies to grow. No one was told that escalation was part of the model. The site's defiance wasn't accidental, and it wasn't temporary. It was built into how the Pirate Bay attracted attention, consolidated loyalty, and expanded its reach. And once a platform learns that conflict increases its power, walking away from that strategy becomes almost impossible, even if it puts everyone using it directly in the line of fire. At a distance, the Pirate Bay looked like a single ship. In reality, it was more like a school of fish. To understand why it became so hard to stop, you don't need to understand code. You just need to understand copying. Imagine a book that doesn't stay on a shelf. Every time someone reads it, the book quietly makes another copy of itself and swims away with the reader. Soon, there isn't one book to burn. There are millions, all drifting in different directions. That's what Gottfried built. The Pirate Bay didn't carry the files people wanted. It only pointed computers toward each other. Every new user wasn't a burden on the system. They were extra strength. More people meant more copies. More copies meant fewer single points to attack. From the outside, authorities saw a website. From the inside, it was a network that got stronger the more it was used. This created a trap that wasn't obvious at first. Once the system reached a certain size, stopping it required shutting down everyone at once. Taking out one server didn't weaken it. It just encouraged the rest to work harder. By 2005, millions of computers around the world were quietly helping each other move data. No headquarters. No center. No master switch. At that point, the outcome was no longer about intention or morality. It was about physics. You can knock over a tower. You can't punch a cloud. And by the time governments realized what they were dealing with, the Pirate Bay had already stopped being something they could realistically turn off. By early 2006, two very different groups were now staring at the same system, and seeing completely different things. On one side were the builders. They saw a discovery. To them, the Pirate Bay was proof that the Internet could route around pressure. That information, once shared widely enough, no longer needed permission. When they talked about what they'd created, they didn't describe a business or a movement. They described a mechanism, something that simply worked once it existed. On the other side were the rights holders and governments. They saw a predator. From their perspective, this wasn't a neutral tool. It was an engine accelerating losses on an industrial scale. Lawsuits against individual users had failed. Takedown notices were ignored or mocked. What remained was the infrastructure itself, the machinery making enforcement impossible. And crucially, that machinery had an address. The Pirate Bay's core systems were still physically housed in Sweden. Servers sat in data centers. Cables ran through buildings. People answered phones. For regulators, this looked like an opening, a place where pressure could finally land. That difference in perception mattered. One side believed they'd uncovered how a system naturally behaves once it's allowed to grow. The other believed they were dealing with a threat that had to be cornered and neutralized. Both thought time was on their side. Both believed the next move would settle the question. Neither fully understood how little the physical location of those machines actually mattered anymore. May 31st, 2006. 5:47 a.m. That's the moment the last off-ramp disappeared. Police teams moved in at 10 locations across Stockholm at once. Doors were forced open. Server racks were unplugged mid-operation. Hard drives slid into evidence bags while indicator lights were still blinking. Engineers in the building stood with their hands raised as equipment was wheeled out. From the outside, it looked decisive. Within hours, Gottfried Svartholm and Fredrik Nage were in custody, separated into interrogation rooms. By late morning, Swedish television was running breaking news banners. The Pirate Bay shut down. Government spokespeople described a major criminal operation dismantled. But the point of no return had already passed. The moment those plugs were pulled, the physical machines stopped mattering. What law enforcement couldn't see, was that the system had already learned how to exist without them. Copies of the site's core data were encrypted, portable, and ready to surface elsewhere. This wasn't a pause or a setback. It was the instant control slipped completely out of human hands. From that second forward, no raid, no matter how large, could put the system back into a box. In the hours after the raid, one of the technicians who worked in the seized data center sat at his desk refreshing a browser tab that wouldn't load. The site he'd checked every day, for work, for curiosity, for habit, was gone. Online forums filled with the same quiet question: is this really it? For most users, the shutdown felt sudden and personal, even if they'd never met the people behind it. A routine had been interrupted. A tool they relied on had vanished without warning. Then, just after midnight on June 2, 2006, the page loaded again. No announcement. No apology. Just a familiar search bar, and a new image on the homepage. A pirate ship firing cannonballs toward a hillside labeled Hollywood. The message wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. The system had survived intact. What followed wasn't chaos. It was amplification. Traffic surged past previous records. Journalists covering the raid sent millions of new visitors without meaning to. Servers didn't fail because of police action. They failed because too many people showed up at once. Behind the scenes, Gottfried and Fredrik worked long shifts stabilizing infrastructure that was now under more strain than ever. Publicly, the response stayed measured. Peter Sunde explained that the downtime wasn't fear, it was preparation. They had moved data to servers in Amsterdam, rerouted connections, and brought everything back online within 72 hours. For authorities, the implications were harder to contain. A coordinated national raid had bought less than 3 days of silence. Prosecutors pushed forward with a criminal case, while the Pirate Bay posted the warrant itself online, annotated with sarcastic comments. Donations increased. Mirror sites appeared across Europe and Asia. What had been a Swedish enforcement action was now a global event. The raid intended to end the problem had instead proven something far more unsettling. Even a full-scale operation, executed perfectly, no longer guaranteed control. Once the servers were no longer the problem, the focus shifted to the people. Courts moved slowly, but they moved with purpose. In 2009, the Pirate Bay trial in Stockholm placed 4 men at the center of a system used by millions. The site itself remained online throughout the proceedings. Traffic barely dipped. Users continued as if the case existed in a parallel world. The institution endured. The individuals did not. When the guilty verdicts were read, 1 year in prison and millions in damages, the message was clear. The system might be difficult to restrain, but examples could still be made. Appeals dragged on. Fines increased. Sentences became final. One by one, the founders disappeared from public life. Peter Sunde eventually turned himself in. Fredrik Nage relocated abroad before serving time. Carl Lundström served his sentence under house arrest. The Pirate Bay continued operating, maintained by anonymous administrators who were never named in court. And then there was Gottfried Svartholm. The architect, the one who wrote the code, vanished entirely. Interpol notices went out. Diplomatic requests followed. While the platform he helped create continued without interruption, The person most responsible for its design became a fugitive, living without a fixed address or legal protection. The contradiction was hard to ignore. A decentralized system absorbed punishment and carried on. The legal system, designed to assign responsibility, could only reach the humans who had once touched it. The structure survived untouched. The builders were left to account for it alone. What happened after the convictions made the pattern impossible to ignore. The Pirate Bay didn't retreat. It adapted. In 2012, the site quietly abandoned torrent files altogether and switched to magnet links, simple strings of text that pointed computers toward each other without hosting anything tangible. There were no files to seize, no central archive to shut down. Just math. Just references. They went further. The entire site database was compressed into a small package and released publicly. Anyone could download it. Anyone could launch a working copy in minutes. The infrastructure was no longer guarded by founders or companies. It was distributed to users themselves. This wasn't defiance. It was design. And it exposed a broader failure that went far beyond one website or one court case. Institutions built to regulate centralized systems were confronting something fundamentally different. Networks that improved when attacked and reformed when disrupted. The same response played out every time. Remove leaders. Seize equipment. Announce victory. Watch the system reappear elsewhere, unchanged. Nothing about this outcome was unique to the Pirate Bay. The same architecture would later appear in file sharing, publishing, finance, and communication platforms around the world. Once information learned how to survive without a center, enforcement strategies stopped scaling. The lesson was uncomfortable but repeatable. You could still punish people. You just couldn't punish the system into disappearing. In the end, the system did exactly what it was designed to do. It survived without its creators. While the Pirate Bay continued operating, maintained by anonymous administrators, mirrored across jurisdictions, accessed through proxies, Gottfried Svartholm's life moved in the opposite direction. Stateless, constantly relocating, he was eventually arrested in Cambodia in 2012 and deported back to Sweden. What followed had little to do with file sharing. New charges accused him of hacking government databases, accessing national ID systems, and attempting financial intrusions. Courts acknowledged his computer had been compromised by outside actors, but ruled that responsibility still rested with him. Prison sentences stacked. Sweden handed him to Denmark. Another trial. Another conviction. Years inside. By the time he was released in 2015, the world he'd helped create no longer needed him. The Pirate Bay was still online. Still reachable. Still functioning. It had outlived raids, trials, prison sentences, and the disappearance of its founders. The individual paid the full price. The structure absorbed the shock and moved on. That imbalance is the quiet ending to this story. When systems are built without centers, accountability doesn't disappear, it concentrates. Not on the network. Not on the users. But on the few human names that can still be written into court documents. The Pirate Bay proved a lesson governments would keep relearning. You can arrest a person. You can seize a server. But once a system is designed to survive without either, control becomes optional, and consequences become personal. And the Internet remembers who tried to stop it. By the time Gottfried Svartholm walked free in late 2015, the system he built no longer depended on him, or on anyone whose name could be written into a warrant. The Pirate Bay was still online. Not centralized. Not owned. Not controllable in any traditional sense. The raids failed. The trials didn't slow it. The prison sentences didn't matter. What remained was the imbalance. A decentralized system absorbed pressure and evolved. Institutions survived intact. And the cost settled almost entirely on the individuals who could still be reached. So here's the question this story leaves behind. If a system can't be shut down, but only its creators can be punished. Who is accountability actually for? Because the Pirate Bay wasn't the last time the Internet learned this lesson. In the years that followed, others would try to do what governments and corporations couldn't: expose, control, or dismantle leaderless digital movements from the outside. One of them was convinced he had finally cracked the code. He believed anonymity was an illusion, that every network had a center, and that he could prove it. He announced it publicly. And within days, the Internet answered back. That story begins with a man who thought he could unmask Anonymous, and discovered what happens when the hunter becomes the target.